Go to sleep already. My VIP guests are arriving, and I don't want any obstacles in the living room. Robert yelled at me, shoving me by the shoulder toward the dark hallway while I was still holding the dish towel. My name is Eleanor. I am 68 years old, and I have spent a decade baking the bread that others eat. What you didn't know is that the key to the pantry and the weight of this house have always been in my pocket. Everything had started many hours earlier at 4 in the morning, when the December cold was still slipping through the cracks of the kitchen windows. At that hour, the house was swallowed by an absolute silence. It was the only moment of the day when I felt this place belonged to me again. I got out of bed with the usual ache in my knees, a dull pinch that has kept me company for years, but which I learned to ignore, because work doesn't wait for the ailments of the old. I slipped on my worn-out slippers. I tied the wool robe my late husband Arthur gave me on our last Christmas together, and I walked slowly toward my territory. The kitchen was freezing, but it would soon warm up. I flicked on the fluorescent light, which flickered a couple of times before illuminating the white tiles. On the center island, massive and pale, waited the 22-pound turkey I had been thawing since Tuesday. Next to it, an enormous pork roast wrapped in plastic awaited its turn. 20 people. That was the number Robert Miller had casually dropped last week with the same ease as someone asking for a glass of water. 20 people from his firm, the new partners, the investors who were going to change his life. Or so he said. I washed my hands with ice-cold water and a bar of soap, feeling my knuckles go numb. I grabbed my blue apron, the one with edges frayed from countless washes, and tied it around my waist. That knot was my battle uniform. I started with the marinade, peeling whole heads of garlic, crushing black peppercorns, squeezing sour oranges until the acid burned a small cut on my index finger. I threw it all into the blender with a heavy splash of cheap white wine, apple cider vinegar, cumin, dried oregano I had sun-dried myself, and a handful of coarse salt. The roar of the motor shattered the early morning silence, but I knew no one upstairs was going to wake up. They are heavy sleepers, the sleep of those who know someone else is awake, holding up the world for them. I rubbed the mixture into the turkey, sliding my hands under the cold skin, massaging the meat so the flavor would penetrate right to the bone. It's physical, heavy work. My wrists protested with every movement, but I kept going. I thought of Arthur. He used to get up with me at this hour. He would sit in the corner chair with a cup of black coffee and keep me company. He didn't cook, but he handed me the knives. He told me bad jokes in a low voice so he wouldn't wake our daughter Valerie. And when the bird was ready to go into the oven, he was the one who lifted it with his strong arms. Now Arthur has been 6 feet under for 5 years, and I had to learn to lift the weight alone, literally, with an effort that pulled a groan from my chest. I lifted the aluminum roasting pan and slid it into the preheated oven. By 6 in the morning, the smell of roasting meat and spices was already filling the house. I sat down for the first time barely 5 minutes to drink a cup of cinnamon tea and warm my hands on the mug. I looked out the window as the sky began to lighten, painting itself a pale, cold blue. There was no time to rest. The pork roast needed its own glaze this time, with brown sugar, cloves, mustard, and pineapple juice. The routine started all over again. Chopping, blending, massaging, baking. At 8 in the morning, my grandkids came downstairs. Leo, who is 7, and little Mia, 4. They ran into the kitchen in their pajamas, drawn by the heat and the smells. "Smells good, Grandma," Leo yelled, wrapping his arms around my legs. The exhaustion vanished for a split second. That is my weakness, my eternal vulnerability. Everything I do, every burn on my arms, every ache in my back, I do for them. I made them a quick breakfast, scrambled eggs with hash browns and warm toast. I sat them at the small kitchen table and watched them eat. I had knitted them red sweaters to wear for the first time that night. I had spent the November nights knitting in secret to surprise them. At 9, Valerie appeared. My daughter dragged her feet into the room, wrapped in a silk robe Robert had bought her on one of his trips. Her hair was a mess, and she had a green clay mask on her face. "Mom, how are you doing with everything? Robert is super stressed," she told me, pouring herself coffee without looking me in the eye. "The turkey is almost done, honey. The pork goes in shortly. Just need to make the desserts, the mashed potatoes, the apple salad, and the pasta. I answered, drying my hands on my apron. Oh, good. It's just that today is a crucial day for him. The owners of the firm are coming. Everything has to be perfect, Mom. Perfect. No chipped plates, okay? The deed to the house is in my name. Arthur and I built it brick by brick, but when he passed away, Robert decided it was best for them to move in here to take care of me. Over time, they changed the furniture, painted the walls in cold, sterile grays I despise, and relegated me to the back bedroom, the one facing the utility yard. I accepted it in silence. I accepted it because I come from that generation of women who believe family peace is worth more than personal pride. I believed that by yielding by serving, I was keeping the love intact. At 11 in the morning, I started on the desserts. The heat in the kitchen was suffocating, now a brutal contrast to the cold out on the street. I prepared the dough for the apple pie, kneading the flour with cold butter until my fingers ached. I peeled 6 pounds of apples, slicing them thin, tossing them with cinnamon, brown sugar, and a touch of nutmeg. Then I made the caramel for 2 large custards. The boiling sugar leaped from the pot, and a drop landed on my right forearm. I clenched my teeth, let out a hiss of pain, rushed to the sink, and ran it under cold water. It left a red, throbbing blister, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If the custard wasn't ready on time, it wouldn't set in the fridge. At 1 in the afternoon, Robert made his first appearance in the kitchen. He came in wearing designer athleisure, talking loudly on his cell phone, puffing out his chest. He hung up and looked me up and down. I was sweating, my white hair plastered to my forehead, stirring the pasta pot. "Eleanor," he said, skipping any polite title, "I hope you're using the exhaust fan. I don't want the house smelling like a cheap diner when the guests arrive." "The fan is on, Robert, but I'm cooking for 20 people. It's normal for it to smell like food," I answered quietly, never stopping my stirring. "Well, open the windows and please hide those old cast iron and enamel pots. I don't want my partners seeing that misery. Use the glass casserole dishes we bought last month." I felt a knot in my stomach, a mix of sorrow and old rage, but I swallowed it down. I went to open the window and the freezing wind hit my sweaty back, making me shiver. I transferred the food into the heavy, slippery glass containers, just like he wanted. At 3 in the afternoon, it was time to set the table in the dark wood dining room Arthur had bought with his first big holiday bonus. I went to the sideboard and pulled out the white linen tablecloth with hand-embroidered edges that belonged to my mother. We only used it for truly special occasions. I spread it over the long table and ran a warm iron directly over the fabric to remove even the slightest wrinkle, bending my back over the table until my kidneys screamed in agony. Then I brought out the good china, the silver cutlery I had to polish piece by piece with baking soda and lemon, because it had tarnished from disuse. I arranged 20 plates, 20 wine glasses, 20 cloth napkins folded like fans. It took me almost 2 hours to make the dining room look like a high-end restaurant. By 5 in the afternoon, the exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was a heavy fog clouding my vision. The turkey was golden, crispy, perfect. The pork roast was releasing a thick, dark glaze. The mashed potatoes were creamy, enriched with the exact amount of heavy cream and butter. The pasta, the salads, the dressings, everything was ready. I had done it all with my 2 hands, with my time with the grinding down of my own bones. All that was left was to warm the bread and serve. I went up to my room, that narrow little space next to the laundry area. I sat on the edge of my twin bed and took a deep breath. Every muscle in my body ached. The burn on my arm throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I looked at my dress, hanging on the closet door, a burgundy dress, simple and elegant, that I had washed and ironed with care. My black, low-heeled shoes were ready. I just needed 10 minutes. 10 minutes to step into the shower, wash away the smell of garlic and onions, put on my dress, brush my white hair, and go out to welcome Christmas with my family. It was 6:30 when I heard the screaming from upstairs. "Leo, take off that hideous, itchy wool sweater. Are you going to put on the collared shirt I bought you?" It was Robert's voice. "But Grandma made it for me," the boy whimpered. "I don't give a damn. Put the shirt on." "Valerie, control your kids. For the love of God, my partners are about to arrive." I hadn't even showered yet, but I knew if I didn't step in, the situation would escalate, and Valerie would end up crying. I stepped out into the hallway, still wearing my dirty apron. I went to the kitchen to check the oven one last time. In that exact moment, the front doorbell rang. It was exactly 7 o'clock. They were early. Panic erupted in the house. I heard Robert's frantic footsteps rushing down the stairs, buttoning the cuffs of an impeccable suit. He smelled of an expensive, overpowering cologne that flooded the hallway, erasing the cinnamon scent of my desserts. Valerie rushed down behind him in a tight black dress, high heels, and flawless makeup, pulling the kids by their hands. Leo was wearing the stiff shirt his father forced on him, his eyes red from crying. I was in the hallway connecting the kitchen to the foyer, right next to the living room. I had a dish towel in my hand, wiping the sweat from my forehead. I took a step forward. My intention was simple: open the door, wish the guests a good evening with a smile, and then slip quietly into my room to change. It was my house, my food, my effort. I wanted to at least offer a welcome. Robert stopped dead when he saw me. His eyes swept over me from head to toe with a disgust he made no effort to hide. He saw my messy hair, my forehead shining with sweat, my apron stained with meat juices, the blister on my arm, my slippers. He saw everything I had sacrificed so he could have his perfect dinner, and all he felt was shame. The doorbell rang again, this time more insistently. Lively voices and laughter echoed on the other side of the heavy wooden door. I took another step toward the foyer. "I'll get it, Robert, don't worry." He shoved me backward, forcing me to retreat into the shadows of the hallway leading to the kitchen. The push was hard enough to make me stumble, losing my balance on my aching knees. I grabbed the doorframe so I wouldn't fall. "Go to sleep already. My VIP guests are arriving, and I don't want any obstacles in the living room," he hissed at me. His whisper loaded with fury, teeth clenched so the people outside wouldn't hear. I froze. The air caught in my throat. I looked into his eyes, hoping to find some trace of remorse, of hesitation. There was nothing, only a desperate urge to hide me, only pure contempt. I turned my head slowly to look at Valerie, my daughter, the little girl whose scraped knees I bandaged, whose college tuition I paid by selling cakes. The woman for whom I had accepted living in the back room. Valerie was standing 6 feet away. She saw the shove, she heard the words. And instead of defending her mother, instead of telling her husband not to touch me, Valerie lowered her eyes to the marble floor. She pretended to adjust the collar on little Leo's shirt. She played deaf. She played blind. Her silence was a second shove, far more violent than Robert's. The doorbell rang for a third time. "Go to your room, Eleanor. You did your part. Now disappear," Robert ordered again, letting go of my shoulder and turning his back on me instantly, his furious face morphing into a massive fake smile as he walked toward the front door. "Mr. Sterling, what a pleasure. Come in, come in. Welcome to our humble home," I heard Robert say in a syrupy voice, throwing the door wide open. "Right this way, please. My wife and I have prepared a spectacular dinner for you." I felt something inside me, something soft and warm that I had kept alive for years, purely out of love for my family, dry up in a flash. It was a physical sensation, as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over the dying embers of my heart. All the exhaustion, all the back pain, the stinging of the burn vanished, replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. They had looked at me as a servant for so long that they forgot who owned the house. They forgot that the turkey doesn't roast itself, that the table doesn't set itself, that the magic of this family didn't come from Robert's wallet, but from my broken hands. They wanted me invisible. They wanted me in the shadows, operating the machinery of their perfect lives without dirtying their photograph. I looked down at my stained apron. I looked toward the kitchen where the ovens were still radiating heat and the food was steaming in its perfect pots. Then I looked toward my room at the end of the hall. Slowly, without making a single sound, I reached behind my back. I untied the knot of the blue apron. I let the fabric fall to the floor with a soft hiss. I tossed the dish towel on top of it. I didn't say a single word. I didn't look back toward the brightly lit living room, where Valerie was taking the strangers' coats. I walked down the dark hallway, dragging my feet just a little, but with my back straighter than it had been in a decade. I stepped into my narrow room. I didn't turn on the light. I grabbed the cold metal doorknob and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was sharp, definitive, cleanly cutting off the fake laughter drifting from the living room. I sat on the bed in the dark, listening, as out there in the dining room they prepared to serve the banquet I had built. They had no idea of the void they had just created. They didn't know that when this door closed, the engine keeping their entire world alive had just shut down forever. In the darkness of my room, the silence rang in my ears, but it didn't last long. Barely seconds after my door latched shut, the noise from the living room began to bleed through the thin walls of my bedroom. I could hear the high-pitched clinking of fine crystal, touching in toasts the deep voices of men discussing business, the rehearsed laughter of the women. I heard Robert's voice booming and confident, dominating the space that Arthur and I had built through so many years of sacrifice and early mornings. "A toast to new beginnings, Mr. Sterling." My son-in-law's voice echoed down the hall and reached my bed. "And to the alliances that will take us to the next level. This house is your house." He said it with a mouthful of pride, giving away a space that didn't belong to him, standing on the floors I had polished on my hands and knees. I sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling the sharp sting of the blister on my right forearm, where the boiling caramel had splashed me hours ago. I raised my hand in the gloom and touched the wound with the tip of my index finger. The pain was sharp, clean, real. It grounded me in the present. For the past 5 years, ever since I closed Arthur's eyes for the last time in the hospital, I had been living in a sort of voluntary lethargy. I had walked the halls of my own home asking for permission, making myself small so I wouldn't be in the way, swallowing insults with the false hope that my submission would buy my daughter's love and my grandchildren's peace. But Robert's shoved that heavy hand on my shoulder, treating me like a stray dog being shooed from the door, had broken the spell. And Valerie's silence, her gaze glued to the marble floor while her husband humiliated me, had swept away whatever pieces were left. I stood up. My knees protested with their usual dull crunch, but this time I paid them no mind. I switched on the small nightstand lamp sitting on the cheap particle board nightstand. The yellow light illuminated my refuge, a twin bed, a cheap wardrobe Robert had bought to replace my antique vanity, and a shoebox tucked in a corner. I walked over to the wardrobe. I opened the doors, which squeaked slightly from the dampness. There, hanging on a wire hanger, was my burgundy dress. I ran my fingertips over the fabric. It was a simple cut with 3/4 sleeves and a modest neckline, but the material had a weight to it that made me feel secure. I had bought it with my own savings to wear for the first time tonight, to sit at the table surrounded by my family. I took it down. I took off my worn slippers. I untied the wool robe that smelled of smoke-fried onions and lonely dawns, letting it fall onto the unmade bed. I dressed with slow, methodical movements. I pulled the zipper up my back, feeling the fabric conform to my tired body. I sat down again to put on my black, low-heeled shoes, fastening the straps over my swollen insteps. I went to the small mirror hanging on the back of the door. I brushed my white hair, pinning it back with a couple of dark bobby pins. I didn't put on makeup. I never liked it, but I pinched my cheeks gently to bring back some color. I didn't look sad. I looked exhausted. Yes, with deep, dark circles casting shadows under my eyes, but there was a new hardness in my jaw. I was no longer the frightened widow yielding her space. I knelt by the bed and pulled out the shoebox I kept underneath. Inside was my real life, the one they ignored. I pulled out a small but sturdy black leather purse Arthur had given me for an anniversary. Inside the purse, I packed my ID, the bank card where my modest monthly pension was deposited, the original keys to the house, and a manila envelope folded in half. Inside that envelope was the deed to the property, in my name, free of any liens or mortgages. Robert had never asked for it directly, but I knew he had been hinting for months that we should regularize the paperwork to put the house in Valerie's name. I never gave it to them. That envelope was my only invisible shield. I also packed Arthur's wristwatch and a silver rosary. I closed the purse and slung it over my shoulder. The plan didn't form in my head in words, but in clear, definitive impulses. If they wanted me invisible, I would be invisible. If my presence was a nuisance to their perfect night, then I would remove my presence entirely. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I walked to my bedroom door and pressed my ear against the wood. The party was in full swing. The jazz music Robert always played to seem sophisticated was playing at a moderate volume. The voices were concentrated in the living room and foyer. The dining room and kitchen, located in the opposite wing, had to be deserted. I gripped the cold doorknob, turned it slowly so the latch wouldn't click, and opened the door just enough to peek out. The hallway was dark. The warm, bright light was coming from the archway connecting to the main living area. I slipped out of my room, walking on the balls of my feet so my heels wouldn't click on the hardwood. I passed the living room archway without breaking my stride, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught the scene. Robert was standing by the unlit fireplace, holding a glass of whiskey on the rocks, flashing all his teeth, as he spoke to a gray-haired man in an impeccable suit. Valerie was sitting on the white leather sofa, legs crossed, nodding at whatever the partner's wife was saying, laughing that high-pitched, hollow laugh she reserved for strangers. My grandkids were nowhere to be seen. They had probably been banished upstairs so they wouldn't interrupt the adults' conversations. Everything was pristine. Everything was a magazine cover lie. I reached the swinging kitchen door and pushed it gently with my shoulder. The temperature shift was immediate. In here, the dense heat of the recently turned-off ovens still lingered, along with the deep aroma of spices, roasted meat, and cinnamon. I turned on only the small light over the stove's exhaust hood, leaving the rest of the kitchen in the shadows to prevent light from spilling under the door into the hallway. I stepped up to the granite center island. There sat the heavy glass casserole dishes Robert had forced me to use. In one rested the pork roast bathed in its dark, thick glaze. In the other, massive and golden, the 22-pound turkey I had massaged, injected, and baked since 4 in the morning. Off to the side, covered in aluminum foil, were the 2 large caramel custards, the mashed potatoes, and the apple salad. I stared at the food. My food. The ingredients for the side dishes and the pork roast had been bought by Robert. That was true. But the turkey, that giant bird that was the star of the night, I had paid for out of my own pocket. "I don't have cash on me, Eleanor. You pay for it and I'll reimburse you tomorrow," he had told me at the market the week before. Tomorrow never came, as was his custom. The ingredients for the desserts had also come from my coin purse, penny by penny, bought at the corner grocery store because Valerie had forgotten to put them on her supermarket list. I opened the bottom pantry drawers. I didn't think twice. I pulled out 3 heavy-duty canvas tote bags, the kind I used to carry vegetables from the farmer's market. I went straight to the turkey's glass dish. I grabbed a large metal spoon and a carving fork. Instead of taking the heavy crystal that belonged to my son-in-law, I grabbed the old blue speckled enamel roasting pan he had ordered me to hide because he considered it misery. With a swift, expert motion, I stabbed the fork into the turkey breast and used the spoon to support it from underneath. It was horrifyingly heavy. My wrists trembled under the strain, but rage gave me a strength I thought I'd lost. I hoisted the perfect bird out of the elegant glass and dropped it into my old pan. The sound of the hot meat settling into the aluminum gave me immense satisfaction. I poured all the juices from the bottom of the glass dish over the turkey in the pan, leaving the crystal completely empty and smeared with grease. I covered the roasting pan with a double layer of foil, sealing the edges tight, and shoved it into the first canvas bag. I went for the desserts. The 2 metal molds holding the caramel custards, cold and perfect, went into the second bag. I grabbed a plastic container with an airtight lid from the cupboard and dumped all the apple salad into it, scraping the edges of the crystal bowl so I didn't leave a single walnut behind. I left the pork roast, the mashed potatoes, and the pasta untouched. After all, Robert had paid for those. Let them eat the sides. Let them celebrate their big business deals, chewing on cold pasta and pork. I was just finishing tying the handles of the canvas bags together when a sharp noise froze my blood. Someone had pushed the swinging kitchen door. I turned slowly, hiding the bags behind the center island, resting my hands on the cold granite. It was Robert. He strode into the kitchen, his face flushed with alcohol and excitement, holding an empty silver ice bucket. He didn't turn on the main light, he just walked straight toward the refrigerator. Seeing me standing there in the gloom, he stopped dead. His eyes scanned my burgundy dress, my clean shoes, my styled hair. His expression morphed from surprise to irritation in a heartbeat. "Eleanor, what the hell are you doing dressed like that?" he snapped, dropping his voice to a furious hiss, taking heavy steps toward me. "Didn't I tell you clearly to go to sleep? I don't want you hovering around here when we're eating." My pulse was pounding in my throat, but my face betrayed nothing. I didn't back up a single inch. "I came for a glass of water," I replied, my voice so flat and icy that I barely recognized it myself. Robert let out a huff of impatience and slammed the silver ice bucket onto the granite counter, barely 2 feet away from the empty glass dishes he hadn't yet noticed in the partial darkness. "Well, drink your water and get the hell back to your room," he ordered, pointing at the door with an accusing finger. "Mr. Sterling is thrilled with the house. In 10 minutes, I'm bringing them into the dining room. Listen to me carefully, Eleanor. In 10 minutes, I'm coming for the turkey and the food. Fill this bucket to the top with ice and leave it right here on the counter, and turn on the oven to warm up the crescent rolls. Do not step out into the hallway for any reason. Do you understand me? I'll come plate the food myself. I don't want my guests seeing my mother-in-law waiting tables." I looked at him. The man who slept under the roof my husband built. The man who ate from my pots, barking orders at me, as if I were a trespasser in my own sanctuary. "Of course, Robert," I said, dragging out the words with deliberate slowness. "I'll take care of the ice." He spun around and pushed through the swinging door, vanishing back into the noise and lights of his fake world. I was completely alone. The clock on the kitchen wall read 8:20 p.m. I had exactly 10 minutes before his house of cards came crashing down on him. I didn't touch the ice bucket. I didn't turn on the oven. I didn't take the crescent rolls out of their plastic bag. I grabbed the 3 heavy canvas bags by their handles. The weight of the turkey in the first bag was brutal. It forced me to lean my body to one side, straining the muscles in my neck and back. The other 2 bags, holding the custards and the salad, hung from my left arm. I walked toward the kitchen's back door, the one leading to the small utility yard, and from there to a side alley connecting directly to the main street. It was the exit we used to take out the trash, the exit for vendors, the exit for the invisible. It was the perfect exit for me. I slid back the rusted iron deadbolt with my free hand. I turned the knob and pushed the door outward. The freezing December night air hit my face like a comforting slap. The contrast with the sweltering kitchen made me let out a long sigh. I stepped out onto the concrete patio, dragging my right foot slightly under the weight of my cargo. I didn't lock the door behind me. I just pushed it until I heard the metallic click securing it from the inside. I walked down the side alley in pitch darkness, guided only by the memory in my feet. When I reached the sidewalk, the yellowish glow of the street lamps lit my way. The neighborhood was deserted. At this hour on Christmas Eve, every family was locked inside their homes, celebrating, eating, laughing. The silence on the street was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my own shoes on the dry leaves and the soft panting of my breath. I hadn't planned a destination when I left my room, but as I walked down the cracked sidewalk of my neighborhood, my feet took me naturally toward the only place I knew the doors would be open. St. Jude's Parish was just 5 blocks from my house. It was the place where Arthur and I got married, where we had Valerie baptized, and where I spent my Thursday afternoons volunteering at the community pantry. The walk was physical agony. By the second block, the canvas straps were digging into my palms, cutting off the circulation in my fingers until they went numb. I had to stop by a streetlight, rest the bag with the turkey on a low brick wall, and rub my hands. The cold chilled me to the bone through the fabric of my burgundy dress, but I felt no cold in my soul. On the contrary, with every step that took me further from my own house, I felt a heavy, ancient scab peeling off my chest. I was breathing clean air for the first time in years. I checked my wristwatch. 8:28 p.m. At this precise moment, Robert had to be pushing through the swinging kitchen door, rubbing his hands together, ready to carry the elegant glass dishes into the dining room. I could picture the scene with photographic clarity. I could see his arrogant smile freezing as he flipped on the light. I could see his eyes locking onto the empty glass containers, smeared with grease and leftovers. I could hear the deadly silence in that kitchen as he realized there was no turkey, no dessert, no salad, and above all, as he realized there was no mother-in-law to scream at. A tiny, dry, razor-sharp smile formed at the corner of my mouth. I picked up the bags and kept walking. In the distance, I saw the stone facade of the parish. The heavy wooden doors were wide open, casting a warm glow over the courtyard. It was hours before the traditional midnight mass, but I knew the adjacent parish hall always had something going on. The women of the community organized a modest dinner for the people in the neighborhood who had no family, for the lonely elderly and the homeless who slept in the square. I climbed the 3 steps to the courtyard, my legs shaking from the exertion. The weight of the food had drawn a cold sweat on my forehead, ruining my brushed hair, but I didn't care. I walked down the side hallway leading to the parish hall. The smell of hot apple cider and melting wax hung in the air. As I crossed the threshold into the hall, the quiet buzz of activity wrapped around me. There were a couple of long plastic folding tables covered with shiny paper tablecloths. About 15 older people were sitting around drinking from styrofoam cups, chatting in low voices. At the back, near a small makeshift kitchen, stood Martha Sullivan. Martha was a woman my age, also a widow with boundless energy and a commanding voice that ran the church choir. She wore a white apron over a thick sweater and was stirring a massive pot of cider with a wooden ladle. When she saw me walk in carrying those heavy bags, practically dragging them across the tile floor, she dropped the ladle and ran toward me. "Holy Mother of God, Eleanor, what are you doing here at this hour? And what are you carrying that's breaking your back?" Martha exclaimed, immediately grabbing the bag with the turkey to take the weight off me. The relief in my arms was so immense, I almost lost my balance. I leaned against the doorframe, taking deep breaths, feeling the blood rush back into my numb fingers. "I brought dinner, Martha," I said, my voice a little raspy from the cold and exhaustion. Martha frowned in confusion, hauled the heavy canvas bag over to one of the empty tables, and began untying the knot. When she opened the bag and saw the massive blue speckled enamel roasting pan, and then peeled back the foil just enough for the golden steam and the aroma of spices to flood the space, her eyes went wide. "Eleanor, this is a feast," she whispered, looking up at me. "What about your family? Your daughter? You told me on Sunday you had a full house, that your son-in-law had invited his bosses." "My son-in-law said he wanted a luxury dinner, Martha," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, without a single tremor in my voice. But he forgot that luxury isn't served on empty plates. And he forgot who owns the kitchen. She didn't need me to explain the details. She saw my party dress wrinkled from the physical strain. She saw the black leather purse slung across my chest holding my entire life. And she understood exactly what I had just done. A smile of deep, silent complicity spread across Martha's face. She nodded, asking no more questions. "Well, you arrived just in time, Eleanor," Martha said loudly, drawing the attention of the elderly folks sitting at the nearby tables. "We've got 20 people here who are going to eat like kings tonight. Bring me the knives, we're going to carve this bird." I walked over to the table, took the carving fork I had brought in the bag, and got ready to serve. Around me, the voices in the parish hall filled with awe and genuine gratitude. The human warmth instantly replaced the chill of the street. As I carved the first slice of white meat perfect and juicy, I heard the distant sound of the church bells striking 9 o'clock. At my house 5 blocks away, the emotional time bomb had detonated. Robert was standing in front of a granite counter, empty-handed, staring into the absolute abyss of his own arrogance. While his VIP guests waited in the dining room, about to discover that their host's castle was nothing more than a hollow facade, propped up by the woman he had just kicked out. And I, for the first time in years, was going to eat in peace. The knife glided through the turkey breast with a smoothness you only get after hours of precise, slow roasting. The golden skin crackled under the metal blade, releasing a thick cloud of steam that smelled of white wine, oregano, and savory juices. Across from me, on the other side of the plastic table covered in shiny paper, Mr. Henderson held a styrofoam plate with 2 trembling hands. His eyes, clouded by cataracts, were locked on the thick slice of white meat I had just carved. Using the large spoon, I scooped up some of the dark au jus pooling at the bottom of my old aluminum pan and drizzled it over the meat. I handed him the plate. The old man nodded without a word and shuffled slowly toward his folding chair. Behind him, Mrs. Higgins was already waiting her turn, clutching a paper napkin to her chest like it was a treasure. For the next 20 minutes, I did nothing but carve, serve, and hand out plates. Martha Sullivan handled the desserts, popping the caramel custards out of their molds onto paper plates, cutting exact portions so there would be enough for everyone. The parish hall, which half an hour ago had been a cold, quiet space, was now filled with the sound of plastic cutlery scraping plates, the low hum of conversation, and the human warmth of 20 people who had expected nothing from this night. I didn't serve myself right away. I stood behind the table, resting my hands on the hard plastic edge, watching the food that had cost me the skin on my fingers and the ache in my back disappear into the mouths of people who received it with reverence. No one here complained that there were no crystal goblets. No one looked at my speckled blue pan with disgust. When the last plate was served, Martha walked up to me with an insulated cup full of hot apple cider. She pressed it into my hands and nudged me gently by the shoulder toward an empty chair in the corner of the room. I sat down. The rigid plastic of the chair yielded a bit under my weight. I felt the dull throb in my knees and the burn on the soles of my feet, but for the first time all day, I didn't feel the urge to get back up and keep working. I took a sip of the cider. The hot, sweet liquid slid down my throat, loosening a knot I hadn't realized had been pulled tight since 4 in the morning. I looked at the hard seat I was resting on. That physical discomfort sent me traveling backward to a Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. It was the day I lost my place to sit in my own home. I had gone to the farmer's market to buy groceries for the week. I walked back in a cold drizzle, carrying 4 plastic bags that cut off the circulation in my fingers. When I opened the front door, I dropped the bags on the foyer floor to shake the water off my coat. That was when I looked toward the living room. The space by the window, the corner where the afternoon sun always hit, was empty. There was a sunken square mark in the carpet. It was the only trace left of the olive green recliner Arthur's chair, the same one where he used to sit and read the paper, and where I had settled in to knit every night since he passed away. I walked into the living room, my wet shoes staining the hardwood. Robert was standing against the wall, holding a metal tape measure, typing numbers into his cell phone. I stopped in front of him. I asked him about the chair. My voice sounded small, drowned out by the sound of the rain against the glass. Robert didn't even look up from his screen. I had the trash guys throw it out, Eleanor. That piece of junk smelled like old people and made the house look miserable. I'm going to buy a minimalist designer sofa for this corner. The firm's partners can't come over and see dumpster furniture. It was the spot where Arthur hugged me when we found out Valerie was pregnant. It was the piece of furniture I had reupholstered by hand to cover a tear. I spun around looking for my daughter. Valerie was in the open kitchen, her back to us, washing a pot that was already clean. The faucet was running at full blast, creating a deafening roar she was using as a shield so she wouldn't have to hear me. "Valerie!" I called to her from the living room. She didn't turn around. Her shoulders tensed beneath her silk blouse, but she didn't shut off the water. She let the noise drown out my plea. She let Robert erase her father's memory and my only resting place, all in the name of a minimalist sofa I was never allowed to sit on. That afternoon, I picked up my bags of vegetables from the floor, walked into the kitchen, passed right behind my daughter without touching her, and locked myself in my room. I never sat in the living room again after that day. The sound of a dry, persistent vibration snapped me violently back to the present in the parish hall. It was coming from inside the black leather purse strapped across my chest. I reached in, pushing past the manila envelope holding the deed to my house, and pulled out the cell phone. It was a cheap device with a small screen that Robert had given me a year ago, claiming it was for emergencies and for him to text me grocery lists when he was at the office. The screen lit up the gloom of my corner. The clock read 9:15 p.m. Below the time, a name flashed in large red letters, Robert. The phone vibrated against the palm of my hand like a trapped insect. I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, watching as the name vanished to make way for a notification. 14 missed calls. 8 from Robert, 6 from Valerie. Barely 3 seconds of silence passed before the device started vibrating again. This time, the name on the screen was Valerie, Martha Sullivan, who was gathering empty plates from the nearest table. noticed the glow of the phone in my hands. She walked over slowly, wiping her hands on her white apron, and stood beside me. She looked at the screen, then looked at my face. "They're calling," Martha whispered in a tone that wasn't a question, just a simple statement of fact. "Yes," I answered without taking my eyes off my daughter's name. "Do you want me to turn it off for you, Eleanor? I can put it in the drawer in Father's office. That way you won't hear it." "I don't want to see it ring." I could picture Robert in the kitchen, his tie yanked loose, his face flushed with panic and rage, throwing open the empty ovens, staring at the greasy glass dishes, realizing there was no turkey, no desserts, no magic. I could imagine Valerie locked in the guest bathroom, dialing my number over and over with trembling fingers, terrified by the public humiliation her husband was about to suffer in front of the men who were going to change his life. They were desperately searching for the invisible maid, but the maid was gone. The phone stopped ringing. The screen went dark, plunging me back into the shadows. I rested my thumb on the side button to power the device off completely, but before I could press it, another call came through. Valerie. That glowing name tugged at the thread of my memories again, forcing me to remember the exact moment I realized my daughter no longer saw me as a mother, but as just another piece of furniture in the house, just like Arthur's green chair. It happened exactly a year ago, on Christmas Eve last year. I had caught a severe case of bronchitis in early December. The cough rattled my chest in the early hours of the morning, a dry, agonizing sound that left me breathless. I had spent 3 days stuck in bed in my narrow room, burning with fever, sweating through the blankets. I didn't even have the strength to get up and pour myself a glass of water. It was the evening of December 23rd. Robert had organized a cocktail party at the house for the managers at his firm. I could hear the soft music and the laughter from my bedroom. My throat hurt so badly I could barely swallow. During a particularly violent coughing fit, I sat on the edge of the bed trying to force air into my inflamed lungs. The noise I made must have echoed down the hall. My bedroom door opened just a few inches. A sliver of yellow light cut through the darkness of my room and stung my eyes. It was Valerie. She was wearing a blue velvet dress and holding a half-empty glass of wine. I thought she was bringing me cough syrup. I thought she brought hot tea, or at least came to ask how I was feeling. I reached a trembling hand out to her in the shadows. Valerie didn't step inside. She stood in the doorway, blocking the light with her body. "Mom," she whispered, in a tone of tight urgency, the same tone Robert used when something annoyed him. "Please try not to cough so loudly or put a pillow over your face. Robert's boss is in the living room, and we can hear everything all the way out there. It makes a really bad impression to have someone sick in the house. Robert is very tense." I couldn't respond because another coughing fit closed my throat. I pressed my hands to my chest, hunching over my own knees. "Thanks, Mom. Try to sleep," Valerie said quickly. And without taking a single step inside, without handing me the empty water glass on my nightstand, she closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was identical to the one I had made tonight when I left. I was left in the dark, coughing into the thick blanket to muffle the sound, feeling cold sweat run down my neck. That night, the fever made me hallucinate a little. I dreamed Arthur was sitting at the foot of my bed, looking at me with immense sorrow. When I woke up the next morning, the fever had broken, but something inside me had frozen solid forever. I got up, went to the kitchen, cooked Christmas Eve dinner in silence, and never confronted Valerie about what she did. I just buried that memory in the exact same place I buried Robert's insults, in the pit of my stomach. But now, watching the phone screen glow with her name, I knew the pit of my stomach was full. There wasn't room for a single drop of contempt more. The phone vibrated one last time and the call dropped. Without waiting for them to dial again, I pressed the power button on the side. The screen asked me to confirm. I tapped yes. The device let out a short goodbye vibration, and the screen went completely black. I shoved it deep into my leather purse, right under the envelope with the deed. I looked up. The parish hall was starting to empty out. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Higgins had gotten up and were shuffling slowly toward the exit, buttoning up threadbare coats, wishing a good night to Father Davis, who had just walked in through the side door. The priest was an older man with snow-white hair and a slow gait who knew every single person in the neighborhood by their first name. He walked over to the table where Martha and I were sitting. He looked at the empty pots, the stacked plastic plates, and then he looked at me. "They tell me we ate a king's feast tonight, Eleanor," Father Davis said, his deep voice resonating off the clean walls of the hall. "The turkey was so tender, Mr. Henderson didn't even have to use his dentures. It was a special recipe. Martha told me you carried all this here by yourself." He knew the house was in my name. He knew about Arthur's death, and he had noticed how I stopped attending Sunday Mass because Robert demanded breakfast served at exactly 9 in the morning. The old priest removed his hand from my shoulder and nodded slowly. "Pride is a very tall building, Eleanor, but it has a very fragile foundation. Your son-in-law built his top floor on your shoulders. When you step out of the way, he falls. That's the law of gravity, not revenge." Outside the street was pitch black. The cold fogged the windows. Going back to my room, that cramped space next to the laundry, meant facing Robert's screaming Valerie's manipulative whining and the demands that I clean up the disaster they had caused themselves. It meant going back to being the maid. "I'm not going back," I said, and as I spoke the words out loud, I felt them turn to stone. They were no longer a thought, they were a fact. "Not tonight, not tomorrow. That house is mine. The bricks are mine, but the hell they built inside it is theirs. Let them sit in it a little longer. You'll take a hot bath. I'll lend you a clean nightgown, and you'll sleep in a real bed," Martha said. I walked over to the aluminum sink in the corner of the hall. I turned on the cold water and started washing my old blue enamel pot. The freezing water numbed my hands instantly, but the mechanical act of scrubbing the grease with a sponge brought my calm back. I washed every container, every spoon, drying them with paper towels. Martha helped me pack it all into the canvas bags, which were now empty. The bags weighed nothing at all. It was almost 10 o'clock when we left the parish. Father Davis closed the heavy wooden door behind us, securing the hallway. Martha and I walked down the sidewalk in the opposite direction of my house. The freezing December wind whipped my face, but I didn't shiver. I walked with a straight back, holding my black leather purse tight against my body. Martha's apartment was only 2 blocks away. It was a modest building with peeling paint and polished concrete stairs. We walked up to the second floor in silence. Martha unlocked her door. She flipped on the light in a narrow hallway and led me to a small room that smelled of lavender and bleach. It had a full-sized bed with a hand-knit bedspread, a light wood closet, and a small window facing the interior courtyard. "The bathroom is down the hall," Martha said, handing me a thick towel and a white flannel nightgown. "Take your time. The hot water takes a minute to kick in, but it gets nice and hot." There was a hard, bright, cold spark in my pupils. I turned on the shower handle and let the steam fill the bathroom. I took off the burgundy dress, carefully unzipping the back. I kicked off the shoes that were pinching my swollen insteps. I stepped under the scalding water. The shock of the heat against my cold skin made me let out a muffled groan. The water ran down my back, down my aching knees, over my tired wrists. I closed my eyes and stood dead still under the water for 15 minutes, letting the smell of garlic, fried onions, and early morning sweat wash down the drain. When I got out, I dried myself slowly. I put on Martha's flannel nightgown. It was a little baggy on me, but unbelievably soft. I walked back into the guest room. Martha had left a steaming mug of chamomile tea on the nightstand, with the bedside lamp turned on. She had already retired to her own room. I sat on the edge of the bed. The black leather purse was resting on a chair near the door. I walked over to it, unfastened the strap, unzipped it, and reached inside. The powered-off phone was still at the bottom, useless and silenced. My fingers brushed past it and found the manila envelope. I pulled it out. I sat back down on the bed and opened the envelope under the yellow glow of the lamp. I pulled out the thick sheets of paper, stamped and signed over 30 years ago. I ran my fingertip over the notary's seal and over the name printed in capital letters, Eleanor Miller, sole owner. I didn't need a lawyer to understand what I was holding. I didn't need a trial to reclaim my space. The power didn't lie in the paper itself. but in the fact that Robert, in his boundless arrogance, had completely forgotten whose earth he was standing on. He thought the money he made at his firm gave him squatter's rights in a castle that wasn't his. He thought I was a ghost tolerated out of charity. Tomorrow morning, that mirage would shatter. Tomorrow, they would have to face the daylight with the hangover of a ruined dinner, with the fresh humiliation burning in their memories, and with the irrefutable evidence that they controlled absolutely nothing. I folded the deed carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. I tucked it into my black leather purse and shoved it under my pillow. I crawled between the clean sheets that smelled of lavender. The mattress was firm. The room was perfectly silent. I couldn't hear Robert's heavy footsteps stomping down the hall or Valerie's demands, or the noise of a house that was sucking my blood drop by drop. I turned off the lamp. In the pitch black, I rolled onto my side, hugging myself under the blankets. My muscles, tense for years, finally began to let go. As sleep pulled me under, a crystal-clear image formed in my mind. I pictured the moment the sun came up. I pictured Robert waking up in the trashed house, surrounded by dirty glass dishes and silence, believing the worst of his punishment was over with tonight's ruined dinner. He had no idea that the real blow wasn't the food I took. The real blow was the door I would open tomorrow when I returned to finish what I started. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in half a decade, I slept straight through the night. The ray of sunlight filtering through the gap in the curtains hit me right in the eyes. I didn't know what time it was at first. My body, trained for decades to spring up like a coiled wire in the pitch black of 4 a.m, was anchored by a heaviness, a warm lethargy that kept me pinned to the mattress. I wiggled my fingers under the knit blanket. My joints ached, a dull reminder of yesterday's titanic effort. But the pain in my chest, that constant tightness that cut off my air every time I heard Robert's footsteps in the hall, was completely gone. I turned my head toward the nightstand. Martha's little alarm clock read 9:15 a.m. 9:15. It had been at least 30 years since I'd seen the morning sun from a bed. I sat up slowly. The white flannel nightgown brushed against the blister on my right forearm, drawing a sharp hiss from my lips. The caramel burn was red and throbbing, but I didn't care anymore. It was a war wound, the very last mark that kitchen would ever leave on my skin. I planted my bare feet on the clean linoleum floor of the guest room. There was no rush. No one was screaming at me that the coffee was cold. No one was demanding I iron a shirt or hide my old pots. The silence in Martha's apartment was a peaceful silence, vastly different from the tense, venomous quiet of my own home. I stood up, slipped on my black, low-heeled shoes, and walked to the door. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and buttered toast filled the narrow hallway. I walked into the small kitchen. Martha was sitting at the table in wool slacks and a gray sweater, reading an old newspaper with her half-moon reading glasses balanced on the tip of her nose. In front of her were 2 steaming mugs and a plate of pastries. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Martha said without looking up from the paper, but with a clear smile in her voice. "I thought I was going to have to go in there and check your pulse. You slept like a rock." Her dark eyes held a gleam of complicity mixed with pure amusement. She rested her elbows on the table and leaned toward me, dropping her voice as if someone might overhear us. "The neighborhood group chat was going off until 2 a.m, Eleanor," she murmured, tapping the cell phone resting next to her plate of bread. "Ernie, the night watchman for your block, saw the whole thing. He sent me a private message at midnight because he knows we're friends. He said your son-in-law's VIP guests started walking out of the house at 8:45 p.m. They weren't even there for a full hour. Ernie says the gray-haired man the boss your son-in-law wanted to impress power-walked straight to his black SUV." Martha continued gesturing with her hands. The boss's wife was right behind him, her face red with rage, buttoning up her coat. Your son-in-law ran all the way out to the sidewalk in just his shirt sleeves, begging them to stay, saying there had been a mix-up with the catering service that they could order food from a restaurant. Ernie says the gray-haired man stopped dead, looked him up and down, and yelled, right there in the middle of the street, "A man who sits me at his table with empty plates and lies to my face about an imaginary banquet is not a man I am going to trust with my firm's money." They got in the SUV and left him standing there freezing on the sidewalk. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but but the release of immense pressure. Robert had built his own gallows. I had simply refused to weave the rope that held him up. He had tried to sell an image of perfection, an illusion of absolute control. But that illusion required my constant sweat, my perfect invisibility. By removing my presence, the house of cards hadn't just collapsed, it had crushed him in front of the only people he cared about. "And your daughter?" Martha asked, her tone softening, watching my reaction. "Valerie chose her side a long time ago, Martha," I answered, staring into the dark depths of my coffee mug. "Yesterday she watched me get humiliated and looked at the floor. Today she'll have to look at the mess that's left. I'm going to the house." I announced it to Martha from the hallway. She poked her head out of the kitchen, frowning. "Are you sure, Eleanor? That man must be like a rabid dog right now. If you want, I can call my son to go with you. I just want to see with my own 2 eyes what happens when the invisible maid actually disappears." I took in the Christmas decorations in the neighbors' windows, the dead lights, the remnants of fireworks on the asphalt. The whole world seemed to be sleeping off the holiday hangover. Everyone except house number 42. I reached the side alley of my property. The service door I had pushed shut the night before was exactly how I left it. No one had bothered to flip the deadbolt. No one had figured out how the turkey walked out. I pushed the rusted metal and stepped onto the small concrete patio. I opened the back door and walked into the kitchen. The visual impact was immediate, but the smell was worse. The kitchen, my spotless sanctuary of white tiles, looked like it had been ransacked. The air reeked of stale alcohol, cigarette smoke, and desperation. I flipped on the overhead fluorescent light. The granite center island was littered with half-empty crystal glasses, dead wine bottles, and sticky puddles of spilled liquor that had already dried. Right in the middle of the counter, like monuments to stupidity, sat the massive glass casserole dishes Robert had forced me to use. They were dirty, smeared with turkey grease and apple salad juice, but completely empty. The floor was covered in breadcrumbs. Someone, probably Robert in his blind panic, had tried to take the raw crescent rolls out of their plastic bags, but had abandoned them half-baked on a baking sheet, now resting lopsided over the sink. There were cigarette ashes in the butter dish. The trash can was overflowing with fine linen napkins, crumpled and stained. I walked through the disaster, feeling my shoes stick slightly to the filthy floor. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the overwhelming urge to grab a rag and start cleaning. I felt a deep, icy satisfaction. This was their true survival capacity. This was what they accomplished when my hands weren't there to fix their mistakes before anyone noticed them. I stopped in front of the swinging door leading to the hallway. From upstairs, the sound of raised voices began to bleed down. They were muffled by the distance, but loaded with venomous fury. "I told you to control her, Valerie. I told you to keep her locked in her damn room." It was Robert's voice. He sounded hoarse, raspy, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "She ruined me. Mr. Sterling blocked my number this morning. He told me I'm a clown, a starving beggar who can't even afford decent catering. She eats from my money," he roared, and the sound of something heavy slamming against the master bedroom wall made the ceiling vibrate over my head. "And look at us now. The firm's contract went straight into the trash. My partners think I'm bankrupt because I serve them cold bread and cheap wine on an empty table. Make her come back. Call her right now and tell her to come clean this pigsty before my parents get here at noon." He wanted the invisible machinery to turn back on because he was incapable of operating his own life. I pushed the swinging door open with a flat palm and stepped out into the foyer. The dining room was worse than the kitchen. My mother's white linen tablecloth, the one I had ironed with such care, was stained with red wine. Crystal glasses were scattered everywhere. The wooden chairs were out of place, some knocked over. It looked like the scene of a panicked getaway. I started walking toward my room at the end of the hall. My footsteps echoed sharply against the hardwood floor. I didn't bother walking on my tiptoes. I didn't bother hiding my presence. The click of my heels reached the second floor. The voices cut off instantly. There was a heavy, expectant silence, followed by the sound of frantic footsteps rushing down the marble stairs. I reached my bedroom door. but before I could turn the knob, Robert's voice boomed behind me. Eleanor. His eyes were bloodshot, bulging from lack of sleep and bottled-up rage. Right behind him, coming down the last few steps, was Valerie. She was wearing a wrinkled silk robe, mascara smeared down her cheeks, her eyes swollen from crying. Robert closed the distance in 3 heavy strides. He stopped 3 feet away from me, invading my personal space, puffing his chest out in a pathetic attempt to reclaim the authority he had lost the night before. "Where the hell were you?" he spat, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "Do you have any idea what you did? Do you have any idea of the humiliation you put me through in front of the most important man in this city?" I observed him with the same clinical detachment you use to watch an insect kicking on its back. "You asked me not to be an obstacle, Robert," I said, my voice so calm and level that it seemed to destabilize him even more. "You screamed at me in front of my daughter to disappear that I had done my part and to get out. Never in all these years have I been so obedient." He clenched his fists at his sides. "You stole the food, my food. I paid for those ingredients. If you weren't capable of serving the cold pork roast in your crystal dishes, that's your problem, not mine. Clean the living room. My parents are coming at 1 o'clock to reheat the dinner, and we have nothing. Help us fix this." Begging me to clean up her husband's filth to save face in front of her in-laws, I looked my daughter up and down. I saw the smeared mascara, the expensive robe, the utter uselessness of her manicured French tip hands. "You are his mother, Valerie." I told her, my words slicing through the cold hallway air like razor blades. "You have 2 perfectly healthy hands. Go into the kitchen, grab a frying pan, and make breakfast for your children. And if the house is dirty, grab a broom. You're old enough to know how this works." "Don't talk to my wife like that," Robert interjected, taking another step toward me, trying to use his size to intimidate me. "You don't give orders here. Look at yourself. You look like a tramp in those borrowed clothes. You are going to walk into that kitchen right now. You are going to take out the trash, you are going to set the dining room, and you are going to cook something for my parents. And if you don't, I swear to God, Eleanor, tomorrow morning I'll pack up your junk and throw you in a nursing home. This is my house, and under my roof, things are done the way I say." I didn't pull the manila envelope out of my purse. I didn't show him the notary's signatures. I didn't need to stoop to arguing law with a man who didn't even know how to sweep up his own mess. His punishment wasn't losing the property deed. His punishment was having to live in it without me. "Don't worry about packing my things, Robert," I answered, turning my back and opening my bedroom door. "I already did." Robert and Valerie stood paralyzed in the same spot, watching me with a mix of disbelief and mounting panic. The high-pitched wail of my grandson Leo drifted down the stairs. "Mom, I'm hungry! Mia spilled milk on the carpet!" the boy yelled from upstairs. Valerie flinched at the shout, looking up and then back at me with begging eyes. "Where are you going, Mom? You can't leave us like this. You can't." "Go peddle your pity somewhere else. We don't need you. I can hire 3 maids better than you tomorrow morning." "Maybe you can afford 3 maids, Robert," I told him, keeping my voice low, making sure every syllable nailed itself into the silence of the hallway. "But no one is going to give you back the contract you lost yesterday, and no one is going to give your guests back the respect they lost for you when they saw you're nothing but a hollow man surrounded by empty plates. You didn't kick me out of your dinner. You freed me from your misery." I grabbed the brass handle of the heavy wooden front door, turned it, pulled it toward me, and stepped out onto the small front porch. The freezing Christmas morning wind wrapped around me instantly, tossing my white hair, but the black leather purse pressed against my chest gave me a profound warmth. I didn't close the door gently. I yanked it shut with all my strength, letting the slam echo through the entire house, a definitive boom that rattled the window panes. As I walked down the stone path to the sidewalk, I heard the unmistakable sound of glass smashing against the floor inside the house, followed by Robert's frustrated, desperate scream and Valerie's uncontrollable sobbing. The chaos had just begun. The invisible machinery had been unplugged forever, and the void it left in its wake was big enough to swallow them whole. They were trapped in the hell of their own incompetence, with the in-laws about to arrive at a dirty house with no food, no contract, and no maid. and I, with my aching knees and my borrowed dress, walked down the empty street feeling for the very first time in my entire life absolutely invincible. The walk back to Martha's apartment was one of the strangest and most revealing strolls of my life. The freezing Christmas morning wind hit me dead in the face, slipping down the collar of my borrowed coat, but it didn't make me shiver once. With every step I took over the cracked sidewalks of the neighborhood, the echo of the door I had just slammed resonated in my memory. A sharp, heavy, crushing sound that had put an end to an entire decade of silence and submission. My black, low-heeled shoes, the same ones I had polished so carefully for a party I was never invited to, made a rhythmic, steady click against the asphalt littered with dry leaves. I felt no cold in my soul. The black leather purse strapped tightly across my chest beat against my ribs like a second heart. Inside it, I carried my identity, my freedom, and the irrefutable proof that the ground Robert walked on with such arrogance was mine. The streets were completely deserted. The remnants of Christmas Eve fireworks stained the pavement with gray patches of burnt gunpowder. Passing by the neighbors' windows, I could see the blinking lights of Christmas trees flashing inside warm, tidy living rooms where families were surely sleeping off a happy night. I didn't have a family like that. Mine had turned into a nest of demands and contempt, a theater of appearances held up by my sweat. But as I turned the corner and lost sight of the facade of my own house, I felt an immense scab peel off my back. I no longer had to cook for anyone who didn't say thank you. I no longer had to shrink myself in the hallways of my own home. I reached Martha's building and walked up the polished concrete stairs with an agility I hadn't felt in years. When I opened the apartment door, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and buttered toast welcomed me back. Martha was still in the small kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes. When she heard the latch click, she dried her hands quickly on her apron and stepped into the hallway, looking me up and down, eyes wide, as if she expected to see me covered in wounds. "What happened, Eleanor?" she asked, stepping close to grab me by the elbows. "Did that animal do something to you? You're pale." "He didn't do anything to me, Martha," I replied, feeling a tiny, involuntary smile stretch the corners of my mouth. "The kitchen is a dumpster. The crystal dishes he forced me to use are stained and empty in the middle of the counter." Robert was losing his mind, screaming that he lost the contract of a lifetime because his boss humiliated him in front of his wife. And what did Valerie do? A 35-year-old woman crying because she doesn't know how to turn on the stove to make her own kids breakfast. The shamelessness of those people has no limits. I slammed the door and left them alone in their own hell. My knees ached, my lower back ached, and the blister on my right forearm where the boiling caramel had splashed popped and formed a dark scab that Martha treated with burn ointment every night. The cheap cell phone Robert had given me stayed powered off, buried at the bottom of my leather purse. I had no interest in knowing how many times they had called. I had no interest in listening to their threats or their begging. Absence was my only answer. On December 28th, I finally put my shoes on and went out. I didn't go to church or the market. I went straight to the municipal utility offices. For years, ever since Arthur was alive, all the house bills were in my name. The electricity, the water, the gas, and even the high-speed internet package Robert demanded for his business video calls were paid automatically from my bank card, out of the pension Arthur had left me. Robert never offered to pay them, and I, in my desperation to keep the peace, never demanded it. I arrived at the first office the power company. I pulled a paper ticket and waited in a hard plastic chair. When the clerk at the window called me up, I handed her my ID and the account number. "I want to cancel the automatic payments, miss," I told her, my voice firm, "and I want to shut off the service in my name. I no longer live at that address." If my presence was a nuisance, then my money and my signature were too. From that moment on, house number 42 would have to hold itself up with the money of the man who thought he owned it. The months began to pass with a sweet, restorative slowness. I moved in with Martha. We agreed to split the apartment expenses, and to generate a little extra cash, we started baking together. I no longer prepped 22-pound turkeys for arrogant businessmen. We baked pastries, apple turnovers, vanilla sweetbread, and pecan cookies that we sold to the neighbors, and after Sunday Mass at St. Jude's Parish. Cooking ceased to be an act of slavery and went back to being what it was when Arthur was alive. an act of love and self-sustenance. It was mid-April, almost 4 months after that Christmas Eve, when the news finally caught up to us, as it inevitably would. Martha and I were sitting on a bench in the parish courtyard, arranging our baskets of bread covered in white cloth napkins, when we saw Ernie approaching. He was the night watchman for the neighborhood where my house was located, an older man, thin as a wire, who spent his nights walking the streets with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee. Ernie took off his faded cap when he saw us and sat on the edge of the stone planter across from us. I offered him a freshly baked apple turnover. He took it with rough hands, took a massive bite, and chewed slowly before speaking. "Oh, Miss Eleanor, you don't know the disaster your house is in." Ernie began brushing crumbs off his gray mustache. "Ever since you left, that property looks abandoned. The grass in the front yard completely dried up. It's yellow, dead. Nobody waters it. The garbage bags pile up on the sidewalk because Mr. Robert got into a screaming match with the trash collectors. He yelled at them that they were starving beggars and refused to tip them. So now the garbage men just drive right past and don't pick up a thing. The stray dogs tear the bags open at night, and the alley reeks. But that's not the worst of it." Ernie continued, dropping his voice and leaning in, adopting the confidential tone of neighborhood gossip. "In early February, the power company cut their electricity. I saw them. The guys in the yellow truck showed up and pulled the meter. Mr. Robert came running out in his boxers, screaming at the workers, but they told him he was 3 months past due. They spent 4 days in the dark lighting candles, until your daughter Valerie had to go pawn some jewelry to pay for the reconnection and set up a new account. Mr. Sterling, the one who went to the Christmas dinner and left furious, made sure to close every door for him. He badmouthed him to all the partners at the firm. They fired him in mid-January. Now Mr. Robert drives around in a compact car selling insurance on commission. The dealership repossessed your daughter's brand new SUV because they stopped making payments. They spend all day screaming. You can hear the fights from the street. They blame each other for everything. I gave Ernie 2 more turnovers on the house, and he said goodbye, disappearing into the crowd starting to arrive for the 6 o'clock mass. The final test came at the end of August, on a sweltering afternoon when the sky was threatening to drop a summer storm. I was in the small parish hall, putting away empty baking sheets, when I heard the sound of heels dragging across the tile floor. I looked up. It was Valerie. I froze, holding an aluminum tray against my chest. My daughter stopped in the doorway. It took me several seconds to process the change in her appearance. She wasn't wearing silk dresses or designer shoes anymore. She wore faded jeans and a wrinkled cotton blouse. Her hair, once perfectly dyed and flat-ironed, showed 3 inches of dark roots and was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her hands, gripping the strap of a cheap purse, had short, unpolished nails with edges chewed down by anxiety. She looked 10 years older. "Hi, Mom," Valerie whispered, her voice fragile, threatening to break at any moment. "Hello, Valerie," I replied, without moving from my spot. I didn't set the tray down. I didn't run to hug her. The woman standing in front of me had allowed me to be humiliated in my own home, and the damage of her silence couldn't be erased by a sad face. Valerie took 2 steps into the hall. She looked around, noticing the smell of burnt sugar and cinnamon that permeated the place. The exact same smell I used to leave in her kitchen every morning before I was kicked out. "I've been looking for you," she said, swallowing hard. "I went to Martha's house several times, but she always told me you weren't there, or she shut the door in my face." "I need to talk to you, Mom, please. Robert has been without a steady job for months. The money he makes from commissions barely covers groceries. The kids had to be pulled out of private school, and we put them in a public one. The house is falling apart. The water heater broke, and we don't have the money to fix it. We've been taking bucket showers with cold water for weeks. We're 2 months behind on property taxes, and the credit cards are eating us alive." I let her empty her sack of tragedies, listening to every detail of the ruin they had built themselves. She looked at me with those big, wet eyes, waiting for maternal instinct to make me run to her with an open wallet, just like I had done so many times in the past. "We need your signature, Mom," she finally blurted out, arriving at the real reason for her visit. She took another step, extending a trembling hand toward me. "We need you to sign a power of attorney or put the deed in Robert's name. If we have the house in our name, we can mortgage it or sell it to pay off the debts and start a new business. I promise we'll give you a cut. I promise everything will be different. Robert has learned his lesson. He's so sorry. Please, Mom, don't leave us out on the street for the sake of your grandkids. It was the exact same hand that hadn't moved a single inch to defend me when her husband shoved me into the dark hallway. It was the hand of the woman who asked me to put a pillow over my face to muffle my coughing so I wouldn't bother her guests. The sheer nerve of coming to ask me for the deed to the house Arthur and I built just to pay off the debts of her husband's arrogance struck me as a sick joke. No, I said. It was a short, dry, absolute word. It dropped into the parish hall with the weight of a granite tombstone. Valerie blinked in confusion, slowly pulling her hand back. No, Mom, I'm telling you, we're going to lose everything. I am begging you. You don't have anything to mortgage because it never belonged to you. Robert thought that if he yelled loud enough, he became the owner, and you believed him. But the papers are still in my purse. I am not signing anything. I am not signing away your father's legacy to save a man who treated me like garbage. You want to see us on the street? You want your grandkids sleeping under a bridge? At the end of the month, I am putting my house on the market. With the money, I'm going to buy a small place for myself, and I'll save the rest for Leo and Mia's college when they're older. They will never lack for anything. But I am not giving the two of you a single red cent. She realized in that exact instant that the submissive mother, the invisible maid who solved all their problems in silence, had died that Christmas Eve. The woman standing in front of her was not going to back down. She turned around, her shoulders slumped, her face disfigured by sobbing, and walked out of the hall, dragging her feet, exactly the way I had done when they kicked me out of my own kitchen. And so it was. 3 weeks later, a cheap moving truck hauled away Robert's minimalist furniture, flat-screen TVs, and designer clothes. Ernie told me they left in the early hours of the morning, heads down, rushing the suitcases out so the neighbors wouldn't see them. They left the keys under the front doormat. I hired a real estate agency. I cleaned the house with Martha's help. I scrubbed the wine stains out of the dining room, fixed the yard, and sold it 2 months later to a large family with 3 dogs who filled the backyard with noise and life. It has been almost 3 years since that Christmas. The leap in time healed the physical wounds and erased the chronic fatigue from my bones. With the money from the sale, I didn't buy a dark apartment or a back room on someone else's property. I bought a small, single-story house in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of the city. It's a modest house with big windows that let the sunlight pour in from dawn, and a backyard where I planted rose bushes and pots of mint. Martha moved in with me. We became business partners and life companions. We turned the spacious living room into our own baking studio. Now we bake to order for local coffee shops and neighborhood events, working at our own pace, without screaming, without rushing, and without anyone demanding we hide our tools. My new kitchen is my true castle. The tiles are a light blue that shines in the morning light. There are no heavy glass casserole dishes or cold granite islands. There are pine wood tables, flour-dusted rolling pins, and shelves full of jars with spices I sun-dry myself. My knees hardly hurt anymore because I sit down to rest whenever my body asks for it, without feeling a shred of guilt. It's Tuesday afternoon. The weather outside is crisp, announcing the arrival of winter. I'm standing at my stove, stirring the contents of a pot. It's not just any pot. It's the old blue speckled enamel roasting pan, the exact same one I used to carry the turkey away that night, the one Robert called misery. Inside it, the boiling caramel for the custards bubbles with a thick, sweet sound, releasing steam that smells of vanilla and toasted sugar. My hands move with dexterity without pain. The white scar on my right forearm is barely noticeable now, blending in with the natural wrinkles of my age. I turn off the burner, grab the enamel pot by its thick handles, and move it to the table with a smooth motion. I wipe my hands on my white apron, immaculate without a single stain of someone else's grease. I walk to the brightest corner of my living room, right next to the picture window overlooking the garden. There, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon, rests an olive-green recliner. It's not Arthur's. That one was lost in the trash a long time ago, but it's an identical one that I hunted for across 10 different stores until I found it. I sit down slowly. The soft cushion yields under my weight, embracing my tired back in absolute comfort. I stretch my legs out, close my eyes, and listen to the silence. There are no urgent phone calls, no heavy footsteps stomping down the stairs, no voices demanding perfection. All you can hear is the song of a bird in the rose bushes and the distant bubbling of caramel cooling in my kitchen. I smile in the gloom, take a deep breath, and finally, I rest in my own home. Please note that the story you just heard is created purely for educational and motivational purposes, designed to help us reflect on the deeper dynamics of human relationships and self-worth. Listening to Eleanor's journey evokes a profound mix of initial heartbreak and ultimate triumph, reminding us of the invisible weight so many people carry in the name of maintaining family peace. The most crucial lesson we can apply to our own lives is that our value is not defined by how much we can quietly sacrifice, but by how deeply we respect ourselves. We often fall into the trap of believing that suffering in silence will eventually buy us love, respect, or harmony, yet it usually only buys us invisibility. True peace requires firm boundaries. When you find yourself in a space where your presence is treated as a burden and your exhausting efforts are demanded without a shred of gratitude, you must find the strength to pack up your dignity and walk out that door. Let this story inspire you to stop breaking your own back to maintain someone else's illusion of a perfect life, and instead, invest your energy into building a quiet, authentic sanctuary where your soul can truly rest. From my personal perspective, this narrative is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It teaches us that it is never too late to reclaim the pen and rewrite the ending of your own story. For years, Eleanor shrank herself to fit into the margins of a life that actually belonged to her, a tragic reality too many gentle souls face today. I deeply admire the quiet, calculated courage she found, not in a screaming match, but in the profound silence of simply walking away. Walking away from toxicity, even when it involves your own flesh and blood, is perhaps the most radical act of self-love one can commit. We must realize that loyalty should never be a blank check for abuse or humiliation. The tragedy of Valerie is a stark reminder that staying silent in the face of cruelty makes us accomplices to the pain of those who love us most. Robert's downfall beautifully illustrates that arrogance is a fragile tower built on the backs of the underappreciated. When the invisible hands stop holding up the sky, those who demanded the world are left with nothing but empty plates and shattered egos. You carry the deed to your own worth in your heart, and you must never let anyone convince you that you are just a guest in your own life. It is perfectly fine to stop pouring from an empty cup to satisfy people who do not even appreciate the taste of what you offer. Real empowerment does not always roar. Sometimes it is the soft sound of a door clicking shut forever. I believe that finding your own comfortable place in the sunlight is the ultimate victory over a world that tried to keep you in the shadows. May we all have the wisdom to recognize when our sacrifices have become our chains. Ultimately, true human dignity lies in knowing when to untie the apron, leave the mess behind, and step out into the liberating air of your own freedom. Disclaimer: the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this commentary are personal reflections intended for inspirational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. They do not constitute professional psychological, family, or legal advice, and listeners should apply these lessons to their own lives with careful consideration of their unique personal circumstances.